I'm Allison Brooks, 32, and my family never saw me as anything but a tool. They leaned on me to keep their world intact, but I was always the outsider. Last month at a family dinner in Portland, Maine, my father stared through me, his voice like a whip, and said, "You're useless. Get out of this house." My brother smirked, relishing my pain. My mother didn't flinch. Those words hit hard, but I didn't crumble. I stood, walked out, and left their toxic world behind. Weeks later, my phone buzzed, 45 missed calls from my brother, desperate for me to fix his mess. But I was done being their doormat. I sent one text that changed everything. This useless child has no family. They thought they could break me, but I flipped their game upside down. Ever been betrayed by family? Before I get to my story, I want to know what time and what city you are listening in. I'm happy to know how far my story goes. Leaving that dinner table was like breaking free from a cage I'd lived in forever. Growing up in our family's Victorian mansion in Portland's West End, I was never the one who mattered. My father Gregory and my mother Patricia built their world around my brother Brian, 3 years older, and always their pride. At 10, I brought home a first-place ribbon from a state math competition, my hands trembling with excitement. Patricia barely glanced at it, muttering about Brian's upcoming soccer match. Gregory clapped him on the back for scoring 1 goal in a losing game while my ribbon sat forgotten on the kitchen counter. By 12, I was fixing their budgeting mistakes, catching overdrafts they didn't notice. They called it helping the family, but it was me holding their fragile empire together. Brian got new sneakers and weekend trips to ski resorts, while I got stern talks about responsibility. I swallowed the hurt, believing love meant sacrifice. At 15, during a family vacation to Cape Cod, I overheard Patricia praising Brian's charm to her friends, while she dismissed my straight-A report card as expected. Gregory once snapped at me for asking about college funds, saying Brian's future was the priority. I learned to stay quiet to be the reliable one who never complained. It wasn't just neglect, it was a system. They leaned on me to keep their finances steady, bills, investments, taxes, while Brian spent freely, never questioned. I thought if I worked harder, they'd see my worth. They didn't. When I turned 20, they handed me full control of the family's finances. I was a data analyst by then, sharp with numbers, so it made sense. I tracked every account, balanced every ledger, and caught every discrepancy. It was exhausting, but I was too good. One late night combing through bank statements, I stumbled on something that stopped me cold. Brian had withdrawn $150,000 from our family trust. He'd funneled it into a shady investment scheme, some startup promising fast returns. I dug deeper, found emails he'd sent to sketchy contacts boasting about big wins. My stomach churned. This wasn't a mistake. It was betrayal. I confronted Brian in his room, papers in hand, expecting him to panic. Instead, he leaned back, smirked, and said, "You're overreacting, Allison. It's just business." He told me to keep my mouth shut, said it wasn't my place to judge. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but Patricia's voice echoed in my head. Family comes first. Gregory's temper loomed like a shadow. So I stayed silent, not out of loyalty, but fear. I kept managing their money, patching the holes Brian left while he partied and bragged about his investments. The trust lost money, but they never blamed him. I was the one who had to fix it always. Years passed and the weight grew heavier. Every spreadsheet I opened felt like a lie I was forced to protect. Brian's scheme collapsed, no surprise there, but Patricia and Gregory acted like it never happened. They'd throw lavish parties, flaunt their status, while I worked late to keep their accounts afloat. I resented every second, but I didn't know how to stop. I was their safety net, the one they took for granted, the one they expected to obey. My silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. But that night at the dinner table shifted something inside me. I couldn't carry their lies anymore. The next morning, I picked up the phone ready to change everything. That phone call I made was the first crack in their carefully built facade, but the real break came weeks before. I'd been dreading the family dinner at 4th Street in Portland, Maine for days. It wasn't just another meal, it was a battlefield. I stood in front of my mirror smoothing out a navy dress, hoping it might finally catch my mother Patricia's approval. It was foolish, I knew. Years of being invisible taught me she'd never notice. My stomach twisted as I drove to the restaurant, my mind racing with old wounds. I rehearsed responses to their inevitable jabs, telling myself I could handle it. I'd survived worse. But deep down, I wasn't sure. At 4th Street, the air smelled of grilled steak and candle wax. We were seated at a polished oak table in the corner, the kind reserved for families who wanted to look important. My father, Gregory, swirled his Merlot, his jaw tight, already sizing me up. Patricia adjusted Brian's tie, cooing about how sharp he looked, as if he were still her golden boy at 35. I forced a smile, trying to join their chatter about a charity gala Patricia was planning. I mentioned a data project I'd led at work, one that saved my company thousands. Brian scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Numbers again, Allison." "Get a real hobby," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Patricia gave a tight-lipped smile, saying nothing. I clenched my napkin, my face burning. Then it hit. Gregory set his glass down, leaned across the table, and fixed his cold eyes on me. "You're useless, Allison," he said, his voice like a blade. "Get out of this house." The restaurant noise faded. Brian's smirk widened, his teeth flashing like he'd won a prize. Patricia stared at her fork, her silence louder than words. My heart pounded, each beat a mix of shame and rage. I wanted to scream, to throw my water glass at their smug faces, but I didn't. I pushed my chair back, the scrape echoing in my ears, and walked out. Their stares burned into my back, but I didn't look back. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the wheel, trembling, as memories of being dismissed as a kid flooded back, not the specific moments, but the weight of them. I felt like that 12-year-old again, desperate for their approval, always falling short. But something else surged inside me, anger sharp and alive. I couldn't keep bending to their will, couldn't keep being their scapegoat. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my tears had dried, replaced by a fire I hadn't felt before. I needed someone who understood, someone who'd seen through their lies. At dawn, I called my Aunt Susan. She was the family outcast, the one they'd erased for daring to question their control. Her phone rang once before she answered. "Allison," she said, her voice steady but warm. "I knew you'd call one day." I poured out the night's events, my voice shaking. Susan listened, never interrupting. Then she told me her story. Years ago, she'd confronted Patricia about favoring Brian, about the way they manipulated everyone to protect their image. Patricia cut her off, banned her from family events, and Gregory backed it up. "They thrive on control," Susan said. "But you're not their puppet. You're stronger than they'll ever admit." Her words were like a lifeline pulling me out of the fog. She urged me to trust myself, to stop letting them define my worth. I spent the morning pacing my apartment, Susan's voice echoing in my head. I wasn't the useless one, they were the ones crumbling, hiding behind their lies. For the first time, I saw a path forward, one where I didn't have to carry their weight. That afternoon, I opened my laptop, ready to take the next step. Opening my laptop that afternoon felt like stepping into a fight I'd avoided too long. Susan's words still burned in my mind, pushing me past the hurt of that night at 4th Street. I was done being their shadow, done letting their lies define me. But the weight of years, decades of their dismissal crushed me. I sat on my couch staring at the screen, my hands trembling with doubt. Could I really break free? Susan had seen their true colors. And now I did too. I wasn't just angry, I was ready. A friend recommended Karen Foster, a lawyer known for handling messy family disputes. I booked an appointment for the next day, my heart racing, as I drove to her office in downtown Portland. Karen's office was small but sharp, with stacks of legal files and a no-nonsense air. I sat across from her, spilling years of frustration, how I'd managed the family's finances, how they'd leaned on me while praising Brian, how I'd stayed silent about his betrayal. Karen listened, her pen moving steadily, her face unreadable. Then I mentioned the house in Acadia National Park, the cabin my grandmother Dorothy had left me in her will. I'd overheard Gregory talking about selling it at the dinner, and something about it felt wrong. Karen pulled up the will on her computer. Her eyes narrowed as she read. "Your family's trying to sell the Acadia cabin," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But Dorothy's will is clear. It's yours, Allison. They can't touch it without your consent." My stomach dropped. They were violating my grandmother's wishes, planning to cash out a place that meant everything to me. The cabin was my sanctuary, where Dorothy had taught me to fish, where I'd felt seen. I gripped the chair, fury rising. They thought they could erase me even from her legacy. Karen laid out my options. I could sue to protect the cabin, maybe even freeze the family's accounts to stop their plans. I nodded, my mind racing, but I needed more than legal moves. I needed them to face the truth. That night, I drafted an email, my fingers flying over the keys. Gregory Patricia Brian. I wrote, my tone cold and deliberate. I know about the $150,000 Brian took from the trust. I know about the failed scheme he hid. And I know you're trying to sell Dorothy's cabin against her will. This stops now. I attached bank statements, emails, proof of Brian's actions I'd saved years ago. I hit send, my heart pounding. They'd ignored me for years, but they couldn't ignore this. The next day, I started untangling myself from their finances. I called the bank requesting a freeze on my access to the family accounts. It wasn't easy. Years of managing their money meant my name was on every form, every transaction. But I was done being their safety net. The banker asked if I was sure. Absolutely, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. I wasn't just stepping back. I was cutting the ropes they'd tied around me. Karen warned it might spark a fight, but I was ready. They'd underestimated me for too long. By the end of the week, my inbox was silent, no reply from Gregory, Patricia, or Brian. But I knew they'd read the email. I could feel the storm coming. Susan called to check in, her voice proud. "You're doing what I couldn't," she said. Karen was already drafting papers to protect the cabin. I wasn't the same Allison who'd walked out of 4th Street. I was building a wall they couldn't tear down. That evening, I opened a new document, ready to take the fight further. Opening that new document felt like drawing a line in the sand. The silence after my email was deafening, but I knew it wouldn't last. Gregory, Patricia, and Brian weren't the type to let a challenge slide, especially not from me. By the next morning, my phone lit up with a call from Brian. His voice was sharp, laced with panic. "What the hell are you doing, Allison?" he snapped. "You think you can ruin us with that email?" I let him rant, his words a mix of threats and desperation. He demanded I retract everything, claiming I'd misunderstood his actions. I hung up, my hands steady. His anger only fueled me. Patricia called next, her tone icy and controlled. "You're tearing this family apart," she said, as if I owed them loyalty after years of their neglect. She insisted I meet them to discuss the email, but I refused. Gregory didn't call, he sent a text, short and brutal. "You'll regret this." I stared at the message, my pulse racing, but I wasn't scared anymore. Their attempts to bully me back into line only proved Susan was right. They thrived on control. I wasn't their puppet anymore. I spent the day finalizing my withdrawal from their finances. I met with the bank manager, a stern woman named Ellen Carter, who reviewed the accounts I'd managed for years. Removing my name from their trusts and investments felt like shedding a weight I'd carried since I was 20. Ellen raised an eyebrow when I explained my reasons, but nodded. "You're doing the right thing," she said quietly, handing me the final forms. I signed them, each stroke of the pen a step toward freedom. The family would have to handle their own messes now, Brian's debts, Patricia's gala budgets, all of it. By midweek, I was back in Karen Foster's office. She dug deeper into Dorothy's will and found ironclad clauses protecting the Acadia cabin. "Your family's plan to sell it is illegal," Karen said, her voice steady. "We can file a lawsuit to block them and demand transparency on the trust." I knotted my jaw tight. The cabin wasn't just a house. It was Dorothy's legacy, the one place I'd felt valued. I gave Karen the bank statements I'd saved, proof of Brian's unauthorized withdrawal of $150,000. She scanned them, her eyes sharp. "This strengthens your case," she said. "We'll hit them with everything." We spent hours preparing documents outlining how Gregory and Patricia had enabled Brian's recklessness. It wasn't just about the cabin anymore, it was about holding them accountable. Their pressure didn't stop. Brian showed up at my apartment unannounced, banging on the door. "You're making a mistake," he shouted, his face red. "You'll destroy everything Dad built." I stood behind the locked door, my heart pounding, but resolute. "Go home, Brian," I said through the wood. "I'm done cleaning up your messes." He left cursing, but his words didn't shake me. Patricia sent an email, formal and dripping with guilt trips, claiming I was betraying Dorothy's memory. The irony burned. She was the one defying my grandmother's wishes. I forwarded it to Karen, who added it to our case file. Susan called every night, her voice a steady anchor. "They're lashing out because you're finally standing up," she said one evening, her tone fierce. "Don't back down, Allison. I didn't plan to." Susan shared more about her own fight with Patricia, how she'd lost years of family ties for speaking truth. Her strength steadied me, reminded me I wasn't alone. I spent late nights reviewing Karen's drafts, ensuring every detail was perfect. The lawsuit wasn't just about protecting the cabin, it was about reclaiming my voice. By the end of the week, the legal papers were ready. Karen filed the initial motion officially challenging the sale of the Acadia cabin and demanding an audit of the trust. I felt a rush of power mixed with fear. Gregory, Patricia, and Brian would fight back, and I knew it wouldn't be clean. But I was ready for whatever came next. That night, I sat at my desk drafting a letter to someone who could tip the scales. Drafting that letter marked the point of no return. The weeks leading to the preliminary hearing felt like a storm brewing every day, heavy with the weight of what was coming. I was ready to face Gregory, Patricia, and Brian in court, to lay bare their lies about the Acadia cabin and the family trust. The Portland courthouse loomed ahead as I parked my car, my palms sweaty but my resolve firm. Karen Foster had prepared me for this, hours of reviewing documents, rehearsing testimony, and bracing for their counterattacks. Susan's encouragement echoed in my mind, a steady reminder I wasn't alone. I stepped into the courtroom, my heart pounding, ready for the fight. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Gregory sat ramrod straight, his face a mask of disdain. Patricia's lips were pursed, her eyes avoiding mine. Brian slouched, his usual smirk replaced by a nervous twitch. Karen stood beside me, her briefcase packed with evidence, bank statements, emails, and Dorothy's will. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, called the room to order. Karen opened with a clear-cutting statement my family had violated my grandmother's will by attempting to sell the Acadia cabin, a property explicitly left to me. She presented the Willits clauses unambiguous, and then dropped the bombshell Brian's unauthorized withdrawal of $150,000 from the trust backed by records I'd saved years ago. Gregory's lawyer, a slick man named Mark Evans, scrambled to respond. He claimed the cabin sale was a family decision, arguing I'd been consulted but misunderstood. Karen countered with my email showing I'd never agreed. Mark then tried to downplay Brian's withdrawal, calling it a misallocated investment that benefited the family. Karen was relentless, presenting emails where Brian boasted about his shady scheme, contradicting their story. The judge's pen moved steadily, her face unreadable. I watched Brian shift in his seat, his confidence crumbling. When I took the stand, my voice was steady. I looked directly at Gregory and Patricia, their eyes cold but wavering. "I managed your finances for years," I said, my tone firm. "I fixed your mistakes, covered Brian's losses, and got nothing but contempt. You tried to sell Dorothy's cabin, my inheritance, without my consent. I'm here to stop that." Brian's face reddened, but he stayed silent. Patricia's hands clenched in her lap. Gregory's jaw tightened, but I didn't flinch. For the first time, I felt like the one in control. Mark cross-examined, twisting my words, suggesting I was vindictive. Karen objected, redirecting to the evidence. The judge nodded, her expression neutral but attentive. Susan and Ellen Carter sat in the gallery, their presence a quiet strength. Susan's nod gave me courage. Ellen's warm smile steadied my nerves. I stepped down, my heart still racing but lighter. I'd said my piece and it landed. The judge delivered the preliminary ruling by day's end. The Acadia cabin sale was blocked pending further review. She ordered an audit of the family trust, citing credible evidence of mismanagement. Gregory's face darkened. Patricia whispered furiously to their lawyer. Brian looked like he wanted to vanish. Karen squeezed my arm, whispering, "We've got them." It wasn't over, but it was a victory. The cabin, Dorothy's gift to me, was safe for now. The trust would be scrutinized, Brian's actions exposed. I walked out of the courthouse, Susan and Ellen by my side, their pride palpable. For years I'd been their shadow. Now I was their reckoning. That night I sat with a cup of tea, staring at the stars through my window. The fight wasn't done, but I was ready to see it through. The final hearing was weeks away, but I was ready to see it through. The Portland courthouse felt less daunting now, its stone walls no longer a symbol of fear, but of truth. Karen Foster had built a case so tight, it left no room for Gregory, Patricia, or Brian to wiggle free. Susan and Ellen Carter stood by me, their support a quiet strength, as I prepared to end this chapter. I wasn't just fighting for the Acadia cabin or the trust, I was fighting for myself. The courtroom was packed on the day of the final hearing. Gregory sat with his arms crossed, his face carved in defiance. Patricia's eyes darted nervously, her usual composure fraying. Brian fidgeted, his bravado gone, replaced by a sullen glare. Karen presented our case with precision. Dorothy's will, clear as day, left the Acadia cabin to me and no one else. She laid out the trust's audit results, revealing Brian's reckless withdrawal of $150,000 enabled by Gregory and Patricia's negligence. Their lawyer, Mark Evans, tried to spin a story of family unity, claiming they'd acted in good faith. Karen dismantled it, presenting emails and bank records that exposed their lies. The judge's gaze was steady, her pen moving as she took it all in. When I spoke, my voice didn't waver. I looked at Gregory, Patricia, and Brian, their faces a mix of anger and shame. "You used me for years." I said, my words sharp but calm. "You took my work, my trust, and tried to take Dorothy's legacy. I'm done letting you control me." The room was silent, the weight of my truth hanging heavy. Mark's cross-examination was weak, his questions deflecting blame. Karen objected, keeping the focus on the evidence. Susan's proud nod from the gallery steadied me. Ellen's quiet smile gave me strength. The judge's ruling came swiftly. The Acadia cabin was mine untouchable by Gregory, Patricia, or Brian. The trust would remain under court supervision with Brian ordered to repay what he'd taken. Gregory and Patricia lost their authority over the family's finances, their control shattered. As the gavel fell, I felt a rush of relief like a knot unraveling in my chest. Karen hugged me, whispering, "You did it." Susan and Ellen met me outside, their faces beaming. For the first time in years, I felt free. I drove to the Acadia cabin the next weekend, the familiar scent of pine and salt air washing over me. The wooden porch creaked under my steps, just as it had when Dorothy taught me to tie fishing knots. I sat by the lake, the water still reflecting the sky. This place was more than a house. It was where I'd learned my worth, where I'd felt seen. I'd fought for it, not just to keep it, but to honor the one person who'd always believed in me. Gregory, Patricia, and Brian hadn't reached out since the ruling. I didn't expect them to. I'd set my boundaries and they'd stay. Susan visited the cabin, often bringing stories and laughter that filled the quiet. Ellen joined us, her warmth a reminder of the family I'd chosen. I started a new project consulting for small businesses in Portland, using my skills on my terms. The weight of my past didn't vanish, but it no longer defined me. I was building a life rooted in my own strength, not their expectations. Looking back, I see the lesson in all this. Family isn't owed your loyalty if it demands your silence. I spent years believing I had to earn their love, bending to their control, but I was wrong. You don't have to carry someone else's lies to prove your worth. Setting boundaries, speaking truth, and walking away from toxicity that's not betrayal, it's freedom. If you're trapped in a cycle like I was, know this: you are enough. Your voice matters. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself.